Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1053 for April 21st, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
The amount of energy that's actually stored within water is quite incredible in the form of hydrogen. So we are generally expecting that it's potentially a day's worth of water that a distillery might use would be enough water to supply an electrolyser for a year.
Beam Suntory has completed a pilot project in Japan to test the use of green hydrogen as a fuel source for directly firing stills. I mentioned this project last time around in our Behind the Label segment, but had the chance this week to dig a little deeper into it with Alistair Leckenby and Al Longwell of Beam Suntory. Leckenby is the lead engineer on Beam Suntory's sustainability work, while Longwell heads up distilling at Beam Suntory's distilleries in Scotland. They'll join me later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, our community segment, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Hey everyone, it's me, Gabriel Cardarello with yours, and I'm here to introduce you to something very special. We've gone and blended the time-honored whiskey craftsmanship of Scotland with the whiskey-making finesse of Japan. And let me tell you, it's something truly remarkable. More on that in a minute.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Laphroaig will be starting the search for a new distillery manager. Barry McAffer is leaving after 3 years to join a startup distillery project in South Korea. In a letter to friends of Laphroaig members this week, he said he wanted to look at opportunities beyond his native Islay. He'll be at Laphroaig through the end of the Islay Festival next month. R&B Distillers has received planning approval from Scotland's Argyll and Bute Council for the proposed Machrihanish distillery in Campbeltown. The approval has several conditions attached to it that have to be addressed before construction can begin. It'll push that back until next spring with production to start in 2026. They've already been growing barley on the Dury farm in Campbeltown and have distilled some at the Isle of Raasay distillery for a future special release. Meanwhile, Isle of Raasay has taken top honors at the London Spirits Competition for its Duncana Sherry Quarter Cask. It took the prize for Best Single Malt Scotch Whisky. Meanwhile, Diageo's Gadawan Century from India took the award for World's Best Single Malt. It's matured in casks infused with Indian botanicals, and only 100 bottles were produced. Charles Goodnight Bourbon from Foley Family Wines was named the competition's best bourbon. Last fall, we took you to Belfast, Northern Ireland, where the McConnell's Whiskey Distillery was still under construction in the former Crumlin Road Jail. Now the work is complete, and the distillery has opened to the public. One of the guests at the grand opening Wednesday has a history with the prison. Northern Ireland Economy Minister Conor Murphy was an inmate at Crumlin Road Jail during the Troubles in the 1980s. New whiskies to mention this week. Beam Suntory is expanding its Overholt rye range with A. Overholt, an homage to the brand's founder, Abraham Overholt. It uses the same mash bill Overholt used in 1810, 80% rye and 20% malted barley. But while Overholt made his whiskey in Pennsylvania, the new whiskey is distilled at the James B. Beam Distilling Company in Kentucky. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $39.99 a bottle. Also on the rye whiskey front, Diageo is reviving the Bullet Rye 12-year-old, which was first released in 2019. It's a limited-time-only release that's made with the same mash bill as the standard Bullet Rye, 95% rye and 5% malted barley. It has a recommended retail price of $54.99 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. Ardbeg has unveiled this year's Ardbeg Day bottling. Spectacular is a link between the distillery on Islay and Glenmorangie in the Highlands, according to the one and only Dr. Bill Lumsden.
Ardbeg Spectacular was just a bit of fun that I tried to kick off back in 2009, and I'd been using the port casks for many years for Glenmorangie Kinta Ruban, and a short period of finishing of 18 months to 2 years seemed a bit of a shame to me. For such expensive casks, it gave me exactly what I wanted for Glenmorangie. So I thought, let's try something here. So I shipped several batches out to Ardbeg and filled it with new spirit. So these second fill port casks have been maturing for the first batch for 15 years and the second batch for about 13 years. And honestly, I really didn't have any great expectations from that. But when I tasted the liquid, which was about a year and a half ago with Gillian in the lab, we thought, wow, this is really quite interesting and quite different. So we decided, right, let's make this a future Ardbeg release. So here it is now for Ardbeg Day.
You made the decision this year to not do a committee bottling. Why?
Okay, I think the main reason for that was that we were aware of the fact that there was some buzz out there that we were releasing too many different versions of Ardbeg. And, we had all sorts of releases in different channels. And, we do listen to what our consumers say. So it was a perception that maybe people weren't wanting so many different releases there. And, it might turn out to be the case that actually the committees say, actually, we preferred it when you did a separate release at a different strength. So it's just a feeling that that's what people want. But, that might not be the case. We'll watch it and see.
Spectacular will be available worldwide in limited amounts around Ardbeg Day during next month's Isla Festival. It'll sell in the U.S. for around $140 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Meanwhile, Glenmorangie has released a new entry-level single malt. Triple Cask is a marriage of whiskeys matured in ex-bourbon, new charred oak, and rye whiskey casks. And Bill Lumsden says it's being released now as a precursor to changes coming for the flagship Glenmorangie Original 10-year-old.
I can't be too specific here, but I was challenged, and I challenged myself to think, to me, it's perfection, and it was the very first single malt Scotch I ever tasted. It was the one that kicked it all off for me. And I've tried very hard over the years to just slightly tweak it and improve it without changing the character. So about 4 years ago, I set myself a challenge and thought, okay, and the CEO at that time was very keen for me to do this, and I thought, how could I make this even better? So the end result of that will be talked about and possibly launched later on this year.
We'll have the details when they are announced later this year. Other new whiskies of note, Chivas Brothers is releasing another polo-themed edition of Royal Salute. The 21-year-old Miami Polo Edition is the sixth release in the Polo collection and is the first Royal Salute expression to be finished in a combination of first-fill ex-bourbon and rye whiskey casks. It's being unveiled this month at a 2-day polo event in Palm Beach and will carry a recommended retail price of $250 a bottle. Bladnoch is wrapping up its Master Distillers Waterfall series with the fifth and final release in the series. The series looks at different ways the same spirit can be matured to create a waterfall effect of flavor profiles. Waterfall 5 is finished in second fill Oloroso Sherry Puncheons and will be released at Bladnoch's Open Day on May 18th. It'll be available exclusively at the distillery for £140 a bottle. Tomatin is releasing a new Kubakan edition in its Creation series of Kubakan peated single malts. Creation number 6 is matured in a combination of PX sherry and Jamaican rum casks. It's available in the UK for £59.95 a bottle. Australia's Callington Mill Distillery is starting a new Heritage series with a Tasmanian single malt finished in ex-bourbon rum casks from the Caribbean. It's the first of 8 whiskies in the series. Only 350 bottles will be available through the distillery for $195 Australian each. Back to Scotland for a minute. The Cabrach distillery in Speyside is scheduled to open this summer and has unveiled its first whiskey. The Fearing is named for the first furrow plowed in a field that acts as a guide for the rest of the plowing. This whiskey comes from single casks donated by 4 neighboring distilleries and was blended by longtime master distiller and Cabrach consultant Alan Winchester. The Fearing Early Harvest is available through the Whiskey Shop and select Speyside retailers for £75 a bottle. Finally, there's new leadership to mention at the American Craft Spirits Association. Kelly Woodcock of Oregon's Westward Whiskey has been elected president of the ACSA after serving as vice president. Amber Pollock of Wyoming's Backwards Distilling is the new vice president, and Jeff Kenoff of Washington's Copperworks Distilling is the new secretary-treasurer. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey these days. Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville will be busy over the next couple of weeks leading up to the Kentucky Derby on May 4th. There's an Elijah Craig tasting this Thursday to celebrate the upcoming PGA Championship in Louisville. The annual Kentucky Derby handicapping dinner is next Tuesday, followed by the Smokes and Spirits Derby Soiree next Wednesday night. The Whiskey Fair Limburg is this weekend in Limburg, Germany. The Spirit of Speyside Festival kicks off next Wednesday and runs through May 6th. The Spirit of Toronto Festival is May 4th. Whiskey and Barrel Night is May 9th in New York City. And Whiskey Live Dublin is May 17th and 18th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's has truly been innovative in perfecting cask finishing, which has led to exceptional expressions of our craftsmanship. This extra step allows our whiskey to further mature in carefully selected casks and marks the final stage of our double aging process, or in Dewar's case, our double aging method, resulting in unique, indulgent tasting experiences. The new Dewar's Double 21-year Mizunara oak cask finish undergoes a meticulous 4-stage aging process, including being finished in sought-after Japanese Mizunara oak casks. Crafting these casks is challenging due to the non-straight growth of Mizunara oak, and it takes 200 years for these trees to reach full potential. The result, a masterfully balanced whiskey with notes of sandalwood, coconut, and creamy vanilla, to name a few. And while it's not the easiest to find, it's an unmissable experience.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Monday is Earth Day, and it's a good time to look at sustainability in the whiskey industry. Last time around, I mentioned Beam Suntory's groundbreaking work in the area of directly firing stills using green hydrogen instead of natural gas. Suntory plans to take that work from its Yamazaki pilot distillery and expand it to a commercial scale at Hakushu, while work is being done in Scotland and England on a small-scale commercially viable electrolyzer that could be deployed at remote distilleries to create hydrogen fuel from water. I talked with Beam Suntory Distilling Director Al Longwell and Alistair Leckenby, the lead engineer for Beam Suntory's sustainability efforts, on a Zoom call this week. Let's first talk about distilling sustainably. How do you do it, given that you're using a carbon fuel source in natural gas largely, and you're using a lot of water? How do you get to net zero in terms of distilling? And I'll open that up to either of you to answer.
I'll maybe jump in there first, and then I'm going to pass on to Alistair because he's the expert, right? I'm just the interested amateur. I'll jump in the water piece. That gives us an opportunity, actually, when you're looking at a distillery's utility use. You can't look at anything in isolation. So, as you know, we've got a drive to improve and optimise our quality at all of our sites. And Glengarry very much was our test bed for that. And we had a good conversation, Cornelia and I, with yourself a few years ago about this. But in doing what we wanted to do to optimise quality, it gave us an opportunity to try and also look at how we do things differently from an energy and water point of view. Because the first thing you kind of want to try and do is where you can is optimise your reuse, your recycling of heat and water. So at Glengarry, by putting in a more efficient direct heating system, we were actually able to significantly reduce the water footprint down to what is one of our best performing sites. The challenge, as you say, though, is how do you replace a hydrocarbon with something that is carbon neutral, or at worst carbon neutral, and that's really the challenge that most distillers have, and that's where Alistair comes into his own. So I'll let him talk about probably the range of things that we're looking at, and specifically, obviously, on hydrogen.
Alistair?
Yeah, I think just to add to what I was saying there, there's two approaches to getting to the ultimate aim of having net zero. Now, the first approach is to essentially get your distillery and your operations as efficient as you possibly can be. You want to reduce the demand on your primary fuel source. And then the second piece is, once you get as efficient as you can be, it's how do you decarbonise that fuel source. Now, just back to what you said on your question there, you need fossil fuels. We don't need fossil fuels generally, we need steam. But the answer just now to creating steam is the use of fossil fuels. And obviously with the project that we're talking to you specifically on, which is a requirement where you do need a combustion to deliver that energy source at the appropriate grade and temperature, then there's other things you can use that don't need to be fossil fuels. And in this case, it's hydrogen that's produced that flame and that energy that we've used for the direct firing.
How do you use hydrogen safely? We've all seen the Hindenburg and various pictures of hydrogen plants blowing up. How do you use it safely in a distilling environment?
So for me, I've actually got some experience working with hydrogen in a previous life. We have got flammable gases coming into our boiler houses anyway. Methane in a pipe is not much less dangerous than having hydrogen. So it's just there's an extra few layers of protection you need to be aware of. Hydrogen can leak a bit more easily than methane or natural gas can. But generally speaking, this is something that we're used to working with a flammable gas as a fuel. So it's just another flammable gas.
Now, how do you create the hydrogen? I know you're using an electrolyzer that Supercritical came up with at the pilot distillery at Yamazaki. How does this thing work?
So there's probably two things to discuss here. The hydrogen electrolyzer that Supercritical are working on is a novel technology. So that isn't the one that generated the hydrogen that we used at Yamazaki. The work that we did at Yamazaki was really to prove that hydrogen can be deployed in a direct firing application, and that it would have, at worst, no material impact on the spirit quality. So it's like a two-pronged project. The project Whisky, there's the generation of a working prototype, high temperature, high pressure, novel electrolyzer, which kind of moves the bar significantly on the efficiency rating of standard electrolyzers. And then the secondary piece, which we've just completed the demonstration of, is how do you actually apply hydrogen within a distillery, within a direct firing application. So in the first piece, that part of the project is still working and is still progressing. Alistair was down in the northeast of England where the test prototype has been installed, along with representatives of the UK government who are funding this project and Supercritical, to see that prototype. And as that progresses, we will look to deploy that prototype in one of our sites. But there are opportunities to get hydrogen from other places. There's quite a lot of initiatives in the early stages at the moment, all looking to come up with, a resilient supply chain for delivery of hydrogen within the kind of areas that would support distilling. So within the northeast of Scotland, within Speyside, within the Cromarty area, which supports the distilleries, in the northeast, north of Inverness. So there's kind of two distinct things. But the other beauty, I think, about the project with supercritical, generally what you're having to do at the back end of electrolyzer is pressurize the hydrogen to get it to sufficient pressure, 200-300 bar, where you can store it in a reasonable scale, because it's such a small molecule. The beauty of the supercritical is you're actually pressurizing the water at the front end of the process, and then you're electrolyzing it under high temperature, under high pressure, and what you get out is high pressure hydrogen. So that it takes away the need to have all the back end process trying to compress, the universe's smallest molecule, and that takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. So this is why this is such a novel technology. It really, if it continues to go the way that we hope it to go, gives you a tool that you can readily deploy at a distillery level. So that was quite long-winded, but there's two things here. We're trying to progress the development of this novel technology, as well as prove can hydrogen work within direct firing in the distillery. I don't know if you get anything you want to add, Al.
Yeah, just to build on that, obviously I don't know what supercritical's IP is, but it's obviously very clever. Generally speaking, hydrogen electrolysis equipment has a membrane in it, so you don't run these things at high pressure because the membrane will burst. Whereas the technology that supercritical have is membraneless. So the interface that they are creating, the oxygen, the hydrogen at, is far more robust than a typical membrane, and therefore the system actually operates at hundreds of bar worth of pressure, and therefore produces hydrogen at that pressure. So you do not have the normal parasitic load that you get from typical hydrogen production, because you don't have to compress it, and it's all down to their very, very clever and novel approach.
Now, I tried to explain this the other day, and I'm not sure I got it right. The electrolyzer works by taking water and cracking the water molecules down into their basic hydrogen and oxygen components, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did get that right.
Yeah.
Now, it produces hydrogen, obviously, which you're going to save, and then the oxygen can also be captured for industrial uses, right?
Yeah, and here I'm sitting here at Ardmore, if you've got something like an aerobic water treatment plant where you need a lot of oxygen to support, you can potentially also harness that oxygen and use it on your distillery site, as well as, you say, capture that, use it, bottle it. But even just pure oxygen going into the atmosphere is no bad thing. It's better than carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases.
Now, this requires a lot of water, doesn't it, to make this work? I know that we're all concerned about supplies of water at distilleries in Scotland, especially with some of the drought issues that have been faced up there. Does that pose a problem in terms of being able to generate the fuel for the hydrogen using water?
So I'll jump in there, and it is a bit of a misconception that these things use an awful lot of water. Compared with the amount of energy that's actually stored within water is quite incredible in the form of hydrogen. So we are generally expecting that it's potentially a day's worth of water that a distillery might use would be enough water to supply an electrolyzer for a year, is the sort of numbers we're looking at. So it's not an awful lot of water at all in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, that makes sense. I was trying to figure that out, just trying to work around the water usage aspects, because I know we're all trying to save water.
Yes.
And that's where it's important, though, even if it was a significant load, by looking at your distillery in the round, and not just looking at the decarbonisation aspect, but looking at the water optimisation. It's always, as Alistair said at the start, it's about trying to reduce our load across everything, our usage across all utilities. So if we can create the capacity to divert water into energy by reducing our need for water for cooling systems, we're currently implementing closed-loop cooling at 2 of our sites. You can then utilise your resources in a different application than we would have done traditionally.
And just to build on that as well, and to the point of actually using hydrogen as a fuel at all, the main product of that combustion is water. So I would like to think in the future, maybe the technology is not quite there yet, but in the future, you might end up having a closed system where you're condensing and recovering all the heat from your exhaust gases and ultimately recovering water as well for reuse. So you could almost have a closed loop in the future.
Very interesting. How do you get through to the efficiency part on the rest of the distilling process and trying to get as close to 100% usage of your feedstocks and water supply as possible without wasting it?
I mean, as we probably spoke to you a couple of years ago, it was Quinelli and myself talking to you about Glengarry, and Alistair was heavily involved in the design of Glengarry. Although that's a direct firing, and traditionally that would have used a lot of heat which would have been wasted through the flue gas, we actually harvest as much of that flue gas energy as we can, and we then use that to create the hot and very hot water for other uses in the distillery. And that's really the trick here, as Alistair says. It's about plumbing up your distillery where you can reuse and close all those loops, and you're not emitting and losing anything, whether that be water or thermal energy. Now, you'll never get it 100%, but the technology is improving all the time, and so is the materials that we use and the know-how. So somebody that's been in the industry like myself for a long time, the energy levels and the water consumption levels are just a million miles away from where they were when I started, because the focus has been on it, and because we're now. It also helps when you've got a burning platform, because that drives you to innovate. And I think that's one thing about our industry. We do share a lot in our industry. We're not doing this in isolation. So we can all learn from each other as distillers.
Yeah, I was about to ask how this works out in the overall industry scheme of things, because I know that Chivas Brothers has done some stuff that they're sharing with the industry. You're sharing some of this technology. How does it work within the entire industry?
Well, we're only going to move forward if we can move forward as a collective, because ultimately none of us will have the resource to do everything and try everything. So, each company will pick its own areas to focus in on, but because we're talking to each other, we all know who's doing what and when. And collectively, as I say, we need to be pushing forward in multiple fronts. And I think that's one thing that the Scotch industry tends to do well, is work collaboratively and share and learnings. I think I just saw, is that your dog and your cat? I just saw it disappearing behind you there.
Yeah, that's the dog.
So yeah, it works well. We've got good forums, SWA, the Malt Distillers Association, Institute of Brewing and Distilling. There's some really good technology sharing within the industry. Till it gets to the shelf, we're all quite friendly, Mark. You know that.
Alistair, you were about to add something there, I think.
Yeah, no. Just to echo Al's point, I think that certainly I've not got the same amount of experience that Al has in the industry. He's been in the industry for about 50 years or something now. Hopefully that doesn't make a podcast. But no, I'm kidding. So I've been in the industry now for just over 5 years, and you do hear stories about it used to be quite closed off, maybe going back several decades, and you'd have people peering over the fence to see what people were doing. Whereas now it's, I certainly feel that it's very, very transparent when ultimately everybody's trying to push in the same direction and in the right direction for the right reasons. So as you've seen, as you quite rightly pointed out with Chivas and talking about their MVR and their TVR system, they went completely open book and they told the world what they've done because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's something the industry's is probably leading on, to be honest with you. I don't think an awful lot of industries are as collaborative as the Scotch whisky industry is.
How soon might we see this put into actual practice with the hydrogen unit?
Well, we're still a few steps away from that. As I say, the demonstrator unit will be getting put through its paces this year. We are starting to turn our head how we might want to deploy that. It probably might not be at the scale to run a whole site, but it's as we like to say, Kaizen. It's incremental steps. We've also got to consider that we're from a standing start, and hydrogen is only one route to decarbonisation, but hydrogen's got a lot of work to do to develop the supply chain. So not having your own on-site electrolyser may not It won't be the answer for every site. It's very good for an off-grid remote site, but if you're close to a hydrogen hub, it'd be easier just coming down a pipe to you or coming in a tube trailer to you, but you need that infrastructure. So there's a lot of investment needs to happen at a high level, both from the major companies who will probably generate the hydrogen, as well as those commercial companies that will then supply, distribute, and get the hydrogen to the door. But, we've moved forward quite quickly. And again, this is where seed funding and UK government and Scottish government funding can really help. It can mitigate some of the pain and mitigate some of the risk for commercial companies. So I would like to think before the end of the decade, you'll see distilleries running on hydrogen, put it out.
And I think, just back to your comment earlier on about the fact that the Scottish whisky industry is so collaborative, and we can't do this as one. So everybody's moving, and if enough people are moving in the same direction, then that's going to drive the interest for parties to really develop those supply chains. It's difficult to create a full hydrogen economy if there's only one distillery trying to do it. But if everyone's moving in the same direction at the same time, and things become a bit more straightforward.
I think that does it. Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
No, we could probably, hopefully, maybe try and speak to you later in the year when we'll have had some experience of the spirit. We're bringing the spirit back from our trial and bringing it to Glengarry to Casket. So maybe the next time you're in Scotland, you can come in by and taste a little bit of hydrogen direct fired spirit.
I was going to ask, why are you bringing the spirit back to Glengarry?
Because we want to see how it matures in Scotland. We want to make sure, we just want to do those follow-up quality checks. In an ideal world, we would have done something similar here in Scotland, but it goes back to what we just talked about. The supply chain wasn't really there at an economical level. But no, another reason to come back to Scotland, Mark, and get up to the northeast. Come and see some floor maltons and some direct firing and taste some hydrogen spirit.
Now, you'll be able to actually compare this spirit with the spirit in Japan too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We can also compare it. We've got some reference spirit which was done on methane direct firing, so that's coming back as well. So we've got the baseline spirit as well as the trial spirit, and then we've also got our own methane direct fired spirit out of Glengarry. So we've got a fair degree of an analytical comparison that we can do on the spirits.
Thanks to Al Longwell and Alistair Leckenby for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the new Ardbeg Spectacular that we heard about during the news. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has a nice balance of peat smoke, red grapes, plums, chocolate mint, lavender, violet, and other floral notes. The taste is peppery and floral with white pepper, clove, and allspice notes, balanced by peat smoke, lavender, violet, and red grapes. The finish is long and well-balanced between spice and floral notes. If you think of this one as Corey Vrecken with a floral touch, you've got a feel for Spectacular. It lives up to the name, and it's one of the best Ardbegs I've tasted in years. I'm scoring the Ardbeg Spectacular a 95. Each year, Dewar's releases a special 19-year-old Champions Edition to celebrate the year's U.S. Open Golf Tournament. This year's Open will be at Pinehurst in June, and the 2024 Champions Edition is finished in rye whiskey casks. It's bottled at 43% ABV, and the nose has touches of pears, honey, soft spices, and vanilla. The taste has notes of pears, honey, cinnamon, cocoa powder, peaches, and hints of black pepper and vanilla. The finish is long and spicy, and I'm scoring the Dewar's 2024 Champions Edition a 93. Moving on now, Kentucky's New Riff Distilling has released its oldest whiskey yet, an 8-year-old bourbon bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has a fresh oaky character, along with touches of honey, tobacco, leather, vanilla, and red apples. The taste is dry and astringent, with notes of red apples, baking spices, vanilla, leather, tobacco, and honey. The finish is long and dry with a subtle touch of oak, and I'm scoring New Riff's 8-year-old bourbon a 94. Finally, Indiana's Hard Truth Distilling may be one of the best small-scale distillers around, and their 4-grain sweet mash bourbon is proof of that. It's a bottled and bond bourbon bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has rye spices, mahogany wood, tobacco, leather, honey, and vanilla. The taste is thick and chewy with good spicy notes of black pepper, allspice, honey, cocoa powder, and vanilla, while the finish is long and spicy with a sweet undertone. I'm scoring Hard Truth Distilling's 4-grain sweet mash bourbon a 94. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,700 whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. 2 homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Time to open the inbox and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whiskey. Had several comments on last week's Port Ellen segment with Ewan Gunn of Diageo, most of them focusing on the price tag for tours of the distillery. Greg Serafian sent this comment from France. Thanks, Mark and Ewan, for this update on my favorite distillery, because a lot of whiskey lovers, including me, who heard about that 200-pound price tag were very unhappy about it. It's good to learn that there is also a free or less expensive / more democratic option for us. That said, I have a 1975 vintage of Port Ellen in my collection, but it is still interesting, and I understand it'll be a rare privilege to sample it and the new make as well. Sláinte. Thank you, Greg. The Tracer Bullet posted this in the WhiskyCast community app. Great interview, Mark. Sounds like those tours are going to be super pricey, though. Interesting to hear why they shut it down. It agrees with what Aniliak told us when we were on Isla. There was a reason they shut it down. The whiskey wasn't that good. I guess it just needed to age a bit, huh? I'll have more on this in a minute. But our whiskey photo of the week sparked a lot of discussion about the merits of palletized warehousing versus rack storage. Mark Coburn said on our Facebook page about palletized warehousing, but does it improve the flavor? I think not, but it does improve profits. Corporate whiskey can't be the best whiskey. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, share it with us in the WhiskyCast community app. It's available to download in the iOS and Google Play app stores, or you can find us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, X, and Threads at WhiskyCast, and my email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey, on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
Every Irish single-farm origin gives completely different flavours when it's malted, fermented, distilled and matured. That's why we're exploring Irish terroir. Imagine how many flavours we find working with over 100 of them. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Balcones Distilling. I mentioned our whiskey photo of the week a minute ago. It shows rows of palletized barrels in a warehouse at Diageo's Bullet Distilling Company in Kentucky. And my caption mentioned that it allows more barrels to be stored in the same amount of space and is safer because workers aren't rolling barrels around by hand. Got a lot of pushbacks on the problems over the benefits, and I'm going to defer to the experts on this. Retired Beam Suntory master blender Ron Welsh points out that there's a change in quality through reduced wood contact compared to so-called bilge maturation, where barrels are stored on their side. He says each barrel end is about 12.5% of the total surface area inside a cask, and from day one of palletizing, the spirit is no longer in contact with that top end of the barrel. Quoting now, years of maturation trials would indicate a 12-year-old palletized cask has similar maturation to an 11-year-old cask matured on its bilge. Doesn't make much difference for a 3 or 4-year-old. The aged stuff is a different matter. Barrel expert Martin Purvis tells us there are higher maturation losses versus bilge maturation, while Paul Karras cites the potential for greater structural damage to barrels and the difficulty of sampling from palletized barrels. That part is true. You have to drill into the side to collect samples from a palletized barrel and then plug the hole in the stave with a wooden peg. That creates more opportunities for leaks over time. It's also harder to check barrels inside a stack for leaks, too. You can see the photo and decide for yourself at WhiskyCast.com. Personally, I prefer barrels stored on their sides. It's more aesthetically pleasing in photos. If you have something you're curious about and would like us to look at it on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Balcones Distilling, the original Texas whiskey at the forefront of the American single malt movement, exploring place and provenance with unique style whiskeys, ranging from the award-winning Texas One and Lineage American single malts to their Baby Blue straight corn whiskey and Texas Rye bottled in bond. Discover whiskey from a new perspective at balconesdistilling.com. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple and Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Dewar's Double 21-year-old Mizunara oak cask finish is like a worldly whiskey adventure you simply can't miss. Courtesy of your friends at Dewar's. Savor it responsibly. Copyright 2024 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.